busy Tuesday on a strike week. Affected ba kayo sa strike? Magandang hapon, salamat sa pagpunta. And let's start. Tinatawagan natin, let's call Mr. Patrick Bonales from the managing partner of Bonales PR and Associates to give us a formal welcome remarks.
Okay. So, good afternoon po, and really appreciate your support and time to be here in our first leg of our book launch for David Haldane's A Tooth in My Popsicle. So, first, I want to thank my mentor, veteran PR and publicist Toots Tolentino, for helping me out with this event. Let's give him a warm round of applause. And of course, John Silva of the Ortigas Foundation Library for allowing us to do the event here in this great place. And of course, last but not the least, thank you, David Haldane, for trusting our firm to handle your events in Manila, Cebu, Iligan, and the finale will be in Surigao. So we look forward to your support for our other event in the Philippines, and watch out for all the different events and activities involving the book Tooth in My Popsicle. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the event. Have a great day.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay. Nasabi ni Patrick, ang ganda-ganda ng venue natin, naiingit ako. Yung libro ko ni-launch ko sa Iloilo 5 years ago, baka i-relaunch ko dito. Sir John, pwede ba yun? So with that, let's welcome the Executive Director of the Ortigas Foundation Incorporated, our home for this afternoon, Mr. John Silva, to give us a few words.
Good afternoon, and I'm John Silva, and thank you all for coming. And I'm very happy to have David Haldane here speak at our book launch. I read his book, took me a day and a half, but easy reading. But what I really like about Dave's book is about his travels in our country, but at the same time, never giving up and always looking at the positive side of what we have. I mean, this country has so many problems, but he manages to circumvent or overcome it. And I think as I see David now and just spoken to him, I think he's a very happy retired person in this country. So welcome, David, and thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm sure, no, excited na kayo makilala at ma-meet ang ating author. So walang patumpik-tumpik, agad-agad, karaka-raka. Let's welcome our author for the day, the author of A Tooth in My Popsicle, the book that is being launched this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. David Haldane.
Hello, everyone. Is this working? Yes. I guess so. Great to see you, and I want to welcome you all. Thank you for coming. I've already spoken to many of you. I also want to welcome the people watching on Facebook. Apparently, there's a live feed, so who knows how many people are out there. And I'm so gratified by by your reaction, by the response. Is this better? Okay. I'm so gratified, that's better. I'm so gratified by the response that the book has gotten and the warm welcome that I've received here and in general. And really, that's kind of what brought me to this country, or at least welcomed me right on and made me want to stay here. It's the warmth and the friendliness and the welcome spirit. I had a conversation not too long ago with someone about this book. In fact, he's right here. And he said something that kind of stuck with me. He said that what he likes about the book, it's a reverse diaspora story. You know, we read and hear so much about the Philippine diaspora, about Filipinos going abroad to support their families, to work, send money back home. But we don't hear that many stories about foreigners from the West, from the U.S. and other places coming here. So it's kind of a different kind of a diaspora immigration story. And the whole concept of diaspora, the idea of the diaspora really resonates with me as a Jew. I'm a Jewish person, and my mother actually was a survivor of the Holocaust. And so, most of my family died in Europe during World War II. So I'm part of the Jewish diaspora. And so I've always related to that, and I've always understood that. And in a way, it's interesting how, for me, in a way, that this journey that I've undertaken, in a way, you know, the Jewish diaspora is all about the homeland of Israel. About we all came from Israel, and one day we shall return. And in an interesting sort of way, the Philippines has kind of become my Israel. I feel that it's my home, and I'm gratified that the Philippines has become my Israel in the same way that it served in that capacity for so many Jews during the Holocaust. Because, as you may know, the Philippines was one of the few countries in the world, maybe at one time the only country, that welcomed Jews from Europe out of the Holocaust. And so in a way, you've always been that kind of a welcoming country. And I feel now that, not that I'm coming from a Holocaust, but in some ways, you know, but I feel that same connection to the Philippines. So I guess my own journey towards the Philippines began with a crisis. I was, as you may know, I was a staff writer for the Los Angeles Times for 23 years, and one day I walked in to the newsroom, and I'll never forget how this happened. You know, my editor, I worked the night shift, and I walked in and sat down at I didn't sit down at my desk. Before I could even sit down, my editor met me and said, "David, let's take a walk." You know, and that's not usually good news. So we start walking down this hall, and he's giving me this long talk about how, you know, things are hard for journalists these days, and the newspaper's been struggling, and blah, blah, blah. And today's been a really hard day. It started with having to lay off the publisher of the newspaper, you know. And as we're walking, I realized that we're walking towards the HR office, you know, which is never good, you know. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, wait a minute, you know. He's talking about me, you know. And I don't know how many of you have seen movies where there's an execution. When I think about it now, it reminds me of the guy being walked to the gas chamber on death row, and you know, everyone's watching him from the cells, and they're rattling their cups and stuff, you know, saying goodbye, you know. That's kind of how I felt when I realized what was happening. And he took me into the HR office, and they had tissues on the desk, and you know, which were very, very appropriate. And I was told, you know, that was the end of my career at the Los Angeles Times. And those of you who are writers and journalists probably understand, you know, working for a newspaper like the LA Times or any newspaper it's kind of becomes who you are. And so when you're told, you know, bye, you know, it's kind of like, oh my God, who am I now? Now, what do I do now? And of course, as it happened, 3 months before, I had just married my lovely Filipino wife, brought her to the U.S., and so now I had to go home, you know, after bringing her out of her country and promising her a new life in America. You know, I had to go home and say, guess what? We don't have any income. And that was the longest drive home I think I ever had. And I think I circled the block a few times before I actually got the courage to walk in and give her the news. But you know what? Her reaction was amazing. She said, "It's okay, sweetie, I love you, and somehow things will be okay." And of course, that's the Filipino attitude. She said that because she's a Filipino, and that's how Filipinos most of the time think about life. And I think that was, for me, at the time, it lifted such a burden from my shoulders, and it made me want to, it comforted me, and it made me begin to think about, that way of life and that way of thinking. And that was really when the idea was born, 3 months after we got married, and she'd just come to the US. That was when the idea was really born of emigrating to the Philippines. It didn't happen for a long time, but that's how it started. That's when the seed was planted. That was way back in 2008, and my wife comes from Surigao, from Siargao actually. So we began making trips back to visit, and I want to introduce her since she's right over here. This is Ivy, my better half. And in her arms is our little baby girl, Adira. She's 2 years old, and we thought a lot about whether or not to bring her today. She's behaving pretty well at the moment since she's asleep, but it was a little challenging to decide whether or not to bring her. And the reason I decided that we should bring her and take the risk of it is that she's an important part of this story, because she wasn't born when all this happened, and she is my first child and my only child born in the Philippines. She was born in Surigao. So the book that we're talking about starts with some of the early trips that we made, when we were thinking about moving here during those 10 years, and it really ends with the birth of Adira, our daughter, which to me really signified my arrival in the Philippines and my belonging here, and the fact that now this is really my home, more than America, more than anywhere else. And so I wanted to bring her and introduce her as well. And it's probably a good thing that she's asleep, because she can get a little rambunctious at times. We brought some extra help just in case, but she's okay, good. So those of you who are writers, of course, know that writing is something you can't exactly turn off and on. So even though I was no longer employed as a journalist, I couldn't stop writing. Who can do that? And so it just became part of. So I began writing about what I was doing and what was going on in my life, and I started writing for a website that's now defunct called Live in the Philippines, and it was published by another expat, American expat, who lived in Davao at the time, and I started writing stories for him, and just about what was going on in my life and how I was experiencing all this. This is before we actually moved here, but we were preparing to, and the stories got a lot of response. Not only from other expats, but from Filipinos, and that's really how this book was born. Eventually, the column was picked up. It was picked up as a weekly column in the Mindanao Gold Star Daily, which is sort of the community regional newspaper in Mindanao. Still runs there. It's called Expat Eye, and it's sort of my weekly take on my life as a Filipino. Or would-be Filipino, wanna-be Filipino, I guess. And so that's how, and so the book really is a collection of those early columns that describe our first 2 years in the country, how we got here, what happened when we did, and so forth. So I'd like to read a few chapters from the book. I'm not, just 3, and so you can get a kind of a taste of what it's about. First chapter is not one that I ever imagined myself reading in public. It's a little embarrassing, but then a very distinguished national artist of the Philippines, Virgilio Almario, I think I got Mario, excuse me, wrote a lovely review of the book, and he focused almost entirely on this one essay. So apparently, I inadvertently mentioned what to him anyway is sort of a national issue. So I'm going to read you that chapter. It's called "The Thing About Poop." So just bear with me, please. I can't help it. It's pressure. Okay, it's called "The Thing About Poop." There's something about poop that makes Westerners nervous. Well, I can't say exactly what it is. I know this. Most Filipinos do not share the discomfort. That was first driven home to me last year during a brief sojourn in Dapa, the teeming port city on the southeast corner of Siargao Island. We were just passing through, really, on our way to the island's interior when nature placed an urgent call. While I might ordinarily have answered with a pleasant hello and perhaps a short chat, it immediately became apparent that on this particular day, nature was in no mood for pleasantries. So I consulted my wife, who immediately directed me to the nearest public restroom. And there lay the rub. Placed demurely at a table directly blocking my path, sat one of the loveliest young ladies I'd ever seen. "Yes, sir," she said brightly with a heart-stopping smile. 5 pesos or 10. It soon became apparent that what she was referring to was the exact nature of my business. While 5 pesos would get me past her with mere zipper rights, only 10 would guarantee any privileges beyond that, duly enforced, I gathered by her possession of what appeared to be the only toilet paper in town. Even as I inwardly rejoiced at my complete comprehension of her question, however, my very soul rebelled at the idea of sharing the intimacies of my bathroom needs with this complete and worse, attractive stranger. How much just to go in? I timidly inquired. "But sir," she shot back with what I imagined to be a barely discernible wink, "will you be needing the paper?" That's when I realized there was no escape. She had me trapped. Without another word, I nodded, hand over the 10 pesos, and held my hand out for the much-needed sanitary material. "Is this enough?" she persisted, offering a strip of tissue thin enough to be ripped to shreds by my increasing hyperventilation. "Or do you need more?" It was the closest I've ever come to fainting. The second closest came 15 minutes later when I ventured back out that door to bathe in her radiant smile as she bid me good day. "Come back soon," she said cheerfully. Sales lady at the mall. I just cringed and slunk away. There was another time my self-imposed shame and the biological necessities of the human condition conspired to ruin my life. It happened more than a decade ago at Magpapunko Beach, a now famous stretch of sand on Siargao Island, where my wife's family owns property. It was almost devoid of structures back then, the perfect place for a family picnic during our getting acquainted period, otherwise known as courtship. Everyone was there, mom, dad, several siblings, aunts and uncles, nephews, nieces, and of course the usual swarm of cousins. So it was with some shyness that I leaned over to gingerly whisper in my sweetheart's ear, "Hey honey, where's the restroom?" Her look of astonishment filled me with dread. "Babe, I don't think there's anything like that on the beach." Obviously trying to break it to me gently. There followed a long discussion in her native language of Bisaya, not a word of which I understood. And as each relative took a turn speaking up in what clearly had become a full-blown family discussion, well, my dread quickly turned to catatonia. "Sweetheart," my fiancée announced, no longer even bothering with the pretense of a whisper, "we'll just have to find you a tree. Kindly come with me." I remember extraordinarily little of what happened after that. She must have taken my hand and led me dumbly through the field of coconut trees. At some point, she probably identified a worthy one and explained what was about to happen. I have a vague memory of her standing guard before leading me back to the family gathering, and a far more vivid one of the family's all-around knowing smiles. Later in my honor, I suppose, they erected a small comfort room near the spot, exceedingly crude and made of stone. Though it has since crumbled into oblivion, I still cringe at the sight of the old rock pile where that restroom once stood. It's been years since my humiliation at the beach, and now we're building a house in the very same province. Besides air conditioning, I have only one unconditional demand. American style toilets, flushing ones, with seats, lots of toilet paper within easy reach. And oh, one other thing, securely locked doors to conceal it. I guess that's a thing in the Philippines, because a lot of people said, oh yeah, they totally relate to that. So I don't think Filipinos are bothered as much as foreigners. The next one is called "Lighting Up the Sky," and this is about this is when Ivy and I went back to celebrate to repeat our vows to her hometown, and this was before we actually moved here, but we were pretty familiar. We came a lot. It's called "Lighting Up the Sky." And by the way, Caridad Beach is where Caridad is her hometown in Siargao. It was the first time Caridad Beach had ever seen fireworks. We hadn't exactly planned it that way, but envisioning the renewal of our nuptial vows on the beach where my wife had romped as a child, a wedding planner asked whether we wanted to light up the sky. Ivy and I looked at each other and realizing we were already way over budget anyway, shrugged our shoulders and said, why not? And so it happened that myriad colored sparks erupted on a recent Saturday night over the white sands of Siargao Island. What had begun at, whoops, there we go. What had begun as a promise had become a reality, our 10th anniversary of blazing dim lights. To make that happen, of course, required a great deal of preparation. Our wedding planners had assigned processional titles and printed up programs. We completed travel plans for ourselves as well as guests from afar. Ivy had selected color schemes and rented dresses, and dozens of bridesmaids had squeezed into the handful of beds in a single house with one bathroom and no running water. Only then came the last hurdle, a nail-biting conference with the grim parish priest to convince him we would not be violating any cardinal rules. As per his instructions, the festivities began the next day with a Thanksgiving Mass in the local chapel, then retreated to the beach for the custom-designed ceremony followed by a long night of carousing. The event was not without its glitches. The master of ceremonies had neglected to remind us to write our own vows, forcing us to do some quick ad-libbing. And when Ivy and her bridesmaids performed the dance they'd been practicing all week, the host overruled my impassioned objections to insist on my unrehearsed participation. The result? A group of smart prancing performers moving in slick unison, accompanied by a lone barong-clad white guy up front, resembling a cheap marionette attached to the strings of a drunken puppeteer. But then came the fireworks and all was forgiven. A few hundred souls spontaneously jumped to their feet in a gut-wrenching cheer. And as the disco music ground deafeningly past the edges of the wind-whisked night under the salt-scented trees, I knew instinctively that everything had turned out fine. In fact, it was perfect. Later, the barangay captain, clearly emotional, sought me out to say thanks. This is important for Caridad, he said, gripping my arm, almost weeping with joy. So many people, so good for the community. His was one of the many expressions of gratitude that night, and that's how I learned something new about my wife's home country. Everyone who's ever been to the Philippines knows its penchant for partying. What fewer understand, though, is how deep that really goes and what it says about the culture's equal penchant for reverence and gratitude. For what began on the beach, for what began at the church had spread to the beach. Thank you, I thought, for this most amazing moment. Thanks for the ocean and the moon and the stars. Thanks for the fireworks that lit up the sky. Thanks for this marriage that has lasted these years. And thanks for this place that has inspired joyful tears. Okay, so this last one is about, it's called 70, and it's about my birthday here in the Philippines. I won't tell you how many birthdays ago that was. It wasn't too many though, I'll say that, just a few. And it was, again, it was an experience of my 70th birthday. It's called 70. My 70th birthday came like a thief in the night. Instead of robbing me, though, it filled me with riches. And now I'm a man left counting his blessings. The day began in the pre-dawn darkness with a choir of young Filipinos serenading me outside my bedroom window before handing me a dozen roses. It ended over 20 hours later in an energetic living room dance reminiscent of the days when disco was king. Set between those two bookends was a love fest the likes of which I seldom have seen. Where I come from, 70 is old. So old that as a young man, I could hardly imagine ever reaching that age, or if I did, that life would still be worth living. So old that when my father died at 72, I honestly felt he had lived long enough. So old that I sometimes scoffed at men that age walking hobbled with canes. Here in the Philippines, it's a whole different story. The native language contains titles of respect automatically bestowed on someone whose age exceeds yours, ranging from older siblings to aunts, uncles, parents, and grandparents. When a Filipino child approaches an adult, he customarily touches the older person's hand to his own forehead and blessing. And though official legal senior status is available only to Philippine citizens, no one has yet asked me for an ID standing in the elder line at the local Jollibee. What it comes down to is respect. Natives of my newly adopted country simply respect age rather than scorn it. I'd of course long been told of the general Asian deference towards age, but hearing of it and experiencing it are quite different things, especially when the elderly person they're respecting is you. So how did all this translate at my recent birthday bash? The setting, of course, was our new home overlooking the ocean, where the party had begun the night before with 20 relatives from Siargao Island. As usual, they all slept on the floor in a writhing mass of heads, arms, torsos, and legs. The next morning, while some set about decorating the place with balloons and fancy tablecloths, others mounted an enormous poster bearing several likenesses of yours truly over the caption, "Happy 70th birthday, David Haldane." You look so handsome, one 19-year-old niece sighed. By the time the guests began arriving later that evening, the drinking had long since begun. So how to describe the next several hours? There was, of course, the usual orgy of imbibing, dancing, and carousing. There were also several toasts to my longevity and health and a series of well-staged photo ops with me, my wife, and our 8-year-old son. And there was a table strewn with Filipino delights such as ube, pancit, an array of colorful seafoods, and a stout pig who arrived squealing in a sack, ready for gutting and roasting. Caterers later said they ran out of food after loading 150 plates. And lest there be any lingering doubt, let me just say that not once, even for a split second, did I ever feel old. In a conversation about aging earlier that day, my 36-year-old wife said, "I look forward to it. I can hardly wait for the time when I have all that knowledge and experience." There, my friends, lies the essential Philippine attitude towards aging. Rather than dread, they embrace it with anticipation. Pretty wise for such a young country, and not too terrible a place for an old guy like me. Thank you. I appreciate your attention. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Vinny David. And there are 73 other essays in the book. At this point, we'd like to ask our author, David, to please take a seat as we're going to do our question and answer. If you have any questions in your mind, or if you've read an essay or two in the book and would like to ask David. I'd also like to ask Patrick to please join us at the table. And at this point, I'm turning over the microphone to our expert here to moderate the Q&A. Sir Boots.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to say again thank you for coming to the book launch. I'd like to also please make mention that I'm thanking all our friends from the media, our supporters, our distinguished guests, Mr. Vin Nadera is here, and all the many others from the different fields of art and culture. Thank you. Now I'm opening the floor for questions. I have another microphone there for David